Some wounds don't bleed. They just teach a man how to stop living. For 7 long years, Luke Mercer had watched the sun rise over the Arizona frontier without once caring whether it rose again. His ranch sat nearly 12 miles beyond Red Mesa, surrounded by dry grass, weathered fences, and the kind of silence that settled deep into a man's bones. Folks in town still remembered him, but only as a shadow of the rancher he used to be. Before the fire. Before the loss. Before the grief that hollowed him out and left only routine behind. Every morning looked the same. Feed the horses. Check the water troughs. Mend whatever the wind had broken during the night. Then sit alone on the porch as the evening sky turned gold beyond the distant mesas. No visitors. No laughter. No reason to expect either. The only thing Luke kept from his old life was a small wooden box stored in the corner of his bedroom. He never opened it. Never touched it. Yet he could tell you exactly what was inside. A faded photograph. A silver hairpin. And a handkerchief stitched with the initials CN Clara Mercer. His wife. Some nights he thought he could still hear her voice carried through the wind. Other nights he wished he couldn't. Then came the storm. It rolled over the horizon just before sunset, dark clouds swallowing the last light of day. The wind pushed across the valley with a cold bite unusual for that time of year. Luke was securing a gate near the creek when he noticed movement through the rain. At first he thought it was a stray horse. Then he saw a figure collapse near the water's edge. By the time he reached her, she was barely conscious. A Native American woman. Apache, judging by her clothing and the turquoise pendant hanging from her neck. Rain soaked her dark hair as thunder echoed across the hills. Luke hesitated. For years he had avoided trouble, avoided people, avoided anything that threatened the fragile walls he had built around himself. Yet something about the woman's exhausted expression reminded him of a promise he could no longer remember. Without a word, he lifted her carefully and carried her back to the ranch house. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth. As the storm rattled the windows. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then, just before dawn, the woman stirred. Luke looked up from his chair. Her eyes opened slowly. Calm brown eyes that seemed far too clear for someone who had traveled through such weather. For several seconds she simply stared at him. Then she whispered 2 words. Clara Mercer. Luke froze. The room seemed to lose all sound. Even the wind outside disappeared. His heart pounded against his ribs as he stepped closer. What did you say? He asked quietly. The woman's gaze never left his face. She looked toward the corner of the room where the unopened wooden box sat beneath a dusty shelf. Then she spoke again, her voice barely louder than the fire itself. Your wife left behind something far more important than you ever knew. Luke did not sleep for the rest of the morning. He sat across from the woman while pale sunlight crept through the cabin windows and turned the dust in the air to gold. The fire had burned low. Outside, the storm was gone. Inside, nothing felt the same. The woman rested against a folded blanket, calm and composed, as if speaking the name Clara Mercer had not just shaken the foundation of a life buried for 7 years. Luke studied her carefully. She looked to be in her early 30s. Strong eyes. Steady posture. The kind of quiet confidence that did not need to announce itself. Finally he spoke. How do you know my wife? The woman looked toward the window where the first rays of sunlight touched the distant hills. Because she saved my family. Luke frowned. That is impossible. No, she replied softly. It only feels impossible because you never knew. The answer unsettled him more than if she had refused to speak at all. For years he had believed there was nothing left to discover about Clara. Nothing left except memories and grief. Yet here sat a stranger carrying pieces of a story he had never heard. The woman reached slowly into the leather satchel resting beside her. Luke tensed without realizing it. She removed a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. The fabric was worn by time, carefully folded and protected. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment before she handed it across the room. Luke took it cautiously. The moment he unfolded the cloth, his breath caught. Inside was a handkerchief. White once. Now faded by years. In one corner were stitched two familiar letters. CM. Luke stared at the embroidery. Every stitch. Every thread. He knew it instantly. Clara had made several handkerchiefs during their first year of marriage. He remembered sitting on the porch watching her sew while evening light settled across the ranch. He remembered her smile whenever she caught him staring. Most of all, he remembered that one had disappeared years before her death. "Where did you get this?" His voice sounded distant, even to himself. "My grandmother kept it," the woman said. Her name was Nita Red Hawk. Luke searched his memory. The name meant nothing. "Many years ago," she continued, "your wife became stranded during a winter storm nearly 30 miles north of here. She was alone. Her horse had wandered off. My grandmother found her freezing beside a canyon trail." Luke blinked. Clara had mentioned getting lost during a storm once. Only once. She had laughed about it afterward and never shared many details. "My grandmother brought her home," the woman said. "She cared for her for 3 days until the weather cleared." Luke lowered his eyes to the handkerchief. Suddenly he could see Clara sitting at their kitchen table all those years ago, smiling at some private memory she never explained. "Why did she never tell me?" he whispered. The woman studied him carefully. "Perhaps because kindness is not something people always speak about." Silence settled between them. Then she said something that made Luke look up immediately. "Before your wife left, she made a promise to my grandmother." Luke felt his pulse quicken. "What promise?" The woman's gaze shifted toward the horizon beyond the window. For the first time since waking, uncertainty crossed her face. "That is why I came here," she said quietly. "Because after all these years, it is finally time for that promise to be fulfilled. Some promises grow heavier with time." Luke turned the handkerchief over in his hands, tracing the faded stitching with his thumb. For years he had believed grief was a closed road. A place with no turns left to take. Yet every word this woman spoke seemed to uncover another mile he had never traveled. The morning sun climbed higher outside the cabin windows. Dust drifted lazily through the beams of light. Somewhere beyond the barn, a horse nickered softly. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. What promise did Clara make? Luke asked again. Aiyana remained silent for several seconds. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "My grandmother was already old when Clara stayed with us," she said. Her eyesight was failing. The winters were becoming harder. Many families were leaving the old lands. Everyone worried about what would happen to the stories. Luke frowned. "Stories?" Aiyana nodded. "The stories carried by the elders. The history. The lessons. The memories that explain who we are." She looked toward the horizon beyond the window. "My grandmother feared they would disappear." Luke remembered Clara's love of books. Shelves filled every corner of their home when she was alive. She wrote notes in journals. Collected family histories. Saved letters most people would have thrown away. Clara listened to her, Aiyana continued. For 3 days she sat beside the fire and listened. My grandmother told her stories she had never shared with outsiders before. Luke felt something tighten in his chest. He could almost picture it. Clara leaning forward, fascinated by every word, refusing to miss a detail. Before she left, Aiyana said, she made a promise. She promised to help preserve those stories someday. Luke lowered his eyes. But she died. Yes. The answer came softly. And for many years we believed the promise died with her. The room grew quiet. Then Aiyana reached into her satchel once more. This time she removed a worn leather journal. The cover showed years of use. The edges were softened by time. She placed it carefully on the table between them. Luke stared. He knew that journal. His heart skipped. Clara had carried it almost everywhere during the final years of her life. After she passed away, he searched for it and never found it. How is this possible? He whispered. Aiyana gently opened the journal. Between the pages rested dozens of notes written in Clara's unmistakable handwriting. Names. Dates. Stories. Observations. Entire pages dedicated to conversations with Nita Red Hawk. Luke felt his throat tighten. For 7 years he had believed this part of Clara was gone forever. Yet here it was, resting inches from his hand. She never forgot, Aiyana said. Not once. Luke carefully turned a page. Then another. The familiar handwriting blurred slightly as emotion filled his eyes. Near the center of the journal, a folded piece of paper slipped free and landed on the table. Aiyana noticed it at the same moment he did. Neither moved for a second. Slowly, Luke unfolded the paper. His breath caught immediately. Written across the top in Clara's hand were 6 words he had never seen before. If you are reading this, Luke. Luke stared at the paper as though it might disappear if he blinked. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every curve of every letter belonged to Clara. For a moment, the years between then and now seemed to vanish. He could almost hear her voice drifting through the kitchen while supper cooked on the stove. His fingers trembled slightly as he continued reading. If you are reading this, Luke, then life has carried this journal farther than I ever imagined. I hope that means someone kept their promise. He swallowed hard. The words felt alive. Aiyana remained silent across the table, allowing the moment to belong to him. Outside, a warm breeze brushed against the cabin walls. Somewhere near the corral, leather tack rattled softly. The ranch continued as it always had, but Luke felt as though the world had quietly shifted beneath his feet. He lowered his eyes and read further. Clara wrote about Nita Red Hawk. About evenings spent beside a fire listening to stories older than maps. About lessons that could not be measured in dollars or acres. About gratitude. About memory. About responsibility. Then came a passage that stopped him completely. Some people save your life once, Clara had written. Others save parts of your heart you did not know were disappearing. Luke closed his eyes. 7 years of grief had taught him how to survive. Nothing more. Survive. Wake up. Work. Sleep. Repeat. Yet reading those words felt strangely different. As if Clara had reached across time to remind him there had once been another way to live. There is more, Aiyana said quietly. Luke looked up. She nodded toward the journal. Several pages deeper, another folded note waited between the worn sheets. He unfolded it carefully. This letter was shorter. More personal. If circumstances ever prevent me from returning, Clara had written, I ask whoever carries this journal to find Luke Mercer. Tell him I never forgot. Tell him kindness always travels farther than we can see. And tell him there is still work left to do. Luke stared at the final sentence. Still work left to do. The phrase echoed through his thoughts. For years he had believed his story ended the day he lost everything. Yet Clara seemed to have believed otherwise. Aiyana rose slowly and walked toward the window. Sunlight illuminated the turquoise pendant resting against her shirt. My grandmother kept the journal until she passed away, she said. Then my mother protected it. When she passed, it became my responsibility. Luke carefully closed the journal. You traveled all this way just to bring me a message. A faint smile touched Aiyana's face. Partly. The answer surprised him. What do you mean? She turned toward him. For the first time since arriving, there was something uncertain in her expression. Not fear. Not hesitation. Something heavier. Because the promise was never only about preserving stories. Luke felt his pulse quicken again. Then what was it about? Aiyana reached into her satchel one final time and removed a weathered map. Its edges were worn. Its markings faded. She carefully spread it across the table. Then she pointed to a location nearly 60 miles west of the ranch. Because before Clara left, she said softly, my grandmother trusted her with a secret that no one has spoken about for 20 years. The map looked ordinary at first glance. Faded ink. Weathered edges. A few landmarks Luke recognized from years of riding the territory. Yet the moment Aiyana placed her finger on the marked location 60 miles west of the ranch, something about the room changed. The air seemed heavier. The silence deeper. Luke leaned forward. What is there? Aiyana studied the map before answering. A valley hidden between two ridges. Most people pass within a mile of it and never realize it exists. Luke glanced at the markings. And Clara knew about this place? Yes. Aiyana folded her hands together. My grandmother showed it to her during the storm. Luke sat back in his chair. The fire crackled softly beside them. Outside, sunlight stretched across the ranch yard, warming the earth left damp by the previous night's rain. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet his thoughts were racing faster than they had in years. Why keep it secret? He asked. Aiyana smiled faintly. Because some things lose their value the moment everyone knows about them. Luke looked down at the map again. A note written in Clara's handwriting appeared near the edge. He recognized it immediately. The same careful lettering. The same precise strokes. His chest tightened. 7 years had passed, yet seeing her handwriting still felt like hearing her voice. What exactly did your grandmother ask Clara to do? Aiyana turned toward the window for a moment before answering. She asked her to protect the valley until the right time came. Luke frowned. Protect it from what? Not from danger, Aiyana said. From being forgotten. The answer lingered between them. Forgotten. Luke knew something about that. For years he had allowed entire parts of himself to disappear beneath grief. Dreams. Friendships. Hope. One by one they had faded until only routine remained. Aiyana slowly rolled the map closed. My grandmother believed every generation receives something worth carrying forward. Sometimes it is land. Sometimes it is wisdom. Sometimes it is a promise. Luke looked toward the old wooden box in the corner of the room. For years he had protected memories by locking them away. Clara had done the opposite. She had carried them forward. The realization settled heavily inside him. Why come now? He asked quietly. After all these years. Aiyana's expression softened. Because I found something else. Among my grandmother's belongings. She reached into her satchel and removed a small envelope yellowed with age. Luke recognized Clara's handwriting immediately. His pulse quickened. Another letter? Aiyana nodded. It was sealed. Addressed to you. Luke accepted the envelope carefully. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingers. As though time itself had preserved it for this exact moment. He stared at his name written across the front. For several seconds he could not move. Then he broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The first sentence made his breath catch. Not because of what it said. Because of what it asked. In neat handwriting Clara had written, Luke, if this letter ever reaches you, I need you to do something I never had the chance to finish. Luke read the sentence again. Then a third time. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. For years he had imagined what it would feel like to hear Clara speak to him one last time. He never expected it would happen through a letter hidden by time itself. The cabin seemed unusually quiet. Even the wind outside had settled. Aiyana remained seated across the room, giving him the space to absorb each word. Slowly, Luke continued reading. I know you, Luke. If you are reading this, your first instinct will be to put this letter away and return to your routine. Please do not. A faint smile appeared despite himself. That sounded exactly like Clara. She had always known how to see through him. Even before he understood himself. The next lines pulled him deeper. There is a valley west of the ridges. A place your maps do not fully show. Nita believes it should remain protected, not because it contains riches, but because it contains something far more valuable. A reminder of who people can become when they choose kindness over fear. Luke paused. He glanced toward the folded map resting on the table. Until yesterday, his world had ended at the boundaries of his ranch. Now every page, every letter, every story seemed to point beyond those familiar fences. What is in the valley? He asked quietly. Aiyana folded her hands. I have never seen it myself. Luke looked up. You traveled all this way and never went there? She shook her head. My grandmother left instructions. The journey was never meant to be made alone. Luke lowered his eyes to the letter once more. Clara's words continued. If the day comes when this reaches you, I hope you will find the courage to finish what I could not. Not because anyone owes the past a debt, but because the future deserves a chance. The sentence lingered in his mind. Future. It was a word he had avoided for years. Grief had taught him to look backward. Never forward. Yet somehow Clara was asking him to do exactly that. Aiyana rose and moved toward the kitchen table. Sunlight illuminated the journal, the handkerchief, the map, and the letter. 4 objects. 4 pieces of a puzzle that had survived decades. My grandmother believed promises carry their own timing, she said softly. Perhaps this was always meant to happen now. Luke looked out the window. Beyond the pasture, the open land stretched toward distant mesas glowing gold beneath the afternoon sun. He realized something strange. For the first time in years, he was curious. Not sad. Not angry. Curious. The feeling startled him. He finished the final section of the letter. Clara's closing words were simple. When you stand at the edge of the valley, you will understand why I never forgot. Luke carefully folded the letter and placed it beside the journal. Then he noticed something neither of them had seen before. A second marking on the map. Faint. Nearly invisible. Hidden beneath years of wear. Aiyana stepped closer. Together they studied the symbol. Neither recognized it. Yet beneath it, written in Clara's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that changed everything. Do not arrive after sunset. The 4 words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. Do not arrive after sunset. Luke had spent most of his life around practical things. Fences. Livestock. Weather. He trusted what could be measured and repaired. Yet nothing about the map, the journal, or Clara's letters felt practical anymore. They felt deliberate. As though someone decades ago had arranged pieces across time and trusted they would eventually fall into place. Aiyana carefully traced the faded symbol near the edge of the map. My grandmother never mentioned this mark, she said. Neither did my mother. Luke leaned closer. The symbol resembled a circle surrounded by small lines that pointed outward toward the compass directions. It was simple, but something about it seemed familiar. He could not explain why. Maybe Clara added it later, he said. Aiyana nodded slowly. That is possible. The afternoon drifted by as they studied the journal together. Page after page revealed details Luke had never known. Clara had written observations about the land, the seasons, and the stories Nita Red Hawk shared beside the fire. Some entries were only a few lines long. Others stretched across several pages. The more Luke read, the more he realized how much of Clara still existed within those words. Not as a memory. As a presence. Near sunset, he found an entry that made him pause. Today Nita told me something remarkable, Clara had written. She believes people become lost long before they lose their way. Sometimes they lose purpose first. Then direction follows. Luke stared at the sentence. For 7 years he had believed grief was the thing that trapped him. Now he wondered if something else had happened. Perhaps he had stopped moving toward anything at all. Aiyana watched his expression but said nothing. She seemed to understand that certain thoughts needed room to settle. The evening light turned amber across the ranch. Shadows stretched across the pasture. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage through an open window. For the first time in years, Luke noticed the beauty of the sunset. Usually he ignored it. Usually he ignored everything. We should leave at first light, Aiyana said quietly. Luke looked up. Tomorrow. The valley is 60 miles away. We can reach the ridges before evening if conditions are good. He expected himself to hesitate. To invent reasons not to go. To retreat into the safety of routine. Instead, he surprised himself by nodding. Tomorrow, he agreed. Later that night, after Aiyana retired to the guest room, Luke remained alone at the table. The journal rested beside him. The handkerchief lay folded carefully nearby. The map remained open beneath the lantern light. He looked toward the wooden box in the corner of the room. For 7 years it had remained closed. Untouched. Almost sacred in its loneliness. Slowly he crossed the room and opened it. Inside rested the photograph, the silver hairpin, and a few treasured keepsakes. Beneath them all, hidden under a stack of old letters, he found something he had completely forgotten. A small sketch Clara had drawn years ago. His breath caught instantly. Because in the corner of that sketch was the exact same symbol that appeared on the map. Luke barely slept that night. The sketch remained beside the lantern until dawn, its worn edges illuminated by the soft golden light creeping through the cabin window. Again and again he compared the symbol on Clara's drawing to the one on the map. They matched perfectly. Whatever Clara had discovered all those years ago, it had mattered enough for her to preserve it in more than one place. Before sunrise, he saddled his horse for the first time with something he had not felt in years. Anticipation. The air was cool as he stepped outside. Aiyana was already awake, securing supplies to her saddle. Neither spoke much. Some journeys begin long before the first mile. The ranch slowly disappeared behind them as morning light spilled across the open land. They followed old trails through rolling grasslands, crossed shallow creeks, and rode beneath towering red cliffs that seemed to glow beneath the desert sun. Hours passed. Yet unlike previous years, Luke did not spend the ride trapped inside his own thoughts. Aiyana occasionally pointed toward distant landmarks and shared stories connected to them. Stories her grandmother once told. Stories Clara had carefully recorded. At first Luke listened quietly. Then he found himself asking questions. More questions than he had asked anyone in years. By midday they stopped beside a spring sheltered beneath cottonwood trees. The water reflected the sky like polished glass. As they rested, Aiyana removed the journal and handed it to him. There is one passage you have not read yet, she said. Luke opened the marked page. Clara's handwriting filled the paper. The entry described a conversation she had shared with Nita Red Hawk shortly before leaving. One sentence immediately captured his attention. People think healing arrives like lightning, Clara had written. But Nita says healing is more like sunrise. It comes slowly enough that most people do not notice until darkness is already gone. Luke stared at the words. Something about them felt deeply personal. For years he had waited for grief to disappear all at once. It never had. Yet sitting beside the spring, traveling toward an unknown destination with someone carrying pieces of Clara's unfinished story, he suddenly realized something remarkable. The weight on his chest was lighter than it had been yesterday. Not gone. Just lighter. The realization unsettled him. And comforted him at the same time. By late afternoon the terrain began to change. The ridges marked on the map appeared ahead, rising from the earth like stone guardians. Aiyana slowed her horse. "We are close," she said quietly. Luke studied the landscape. The hidden valley still remained out of sight. Yet something else caught his attention. Along the ridge face stood several stone markers positioned at irregular intervals. They looked ancient. Weathered by countless seasons. He pointed toward them. Were those on the map? Aiyana shook her head. No, they approached carefully. As Luke drew nearer, his breath caught. Carved into the nearest stone was the same symbol that appeared on Clara's sketch. The same symbol from the map. The same symbol she had preserved for decades. Aiyana dismounted first. Her expression had grown serious. Then she noticed something tucked beneath the stone marker. A small metal box. Untouched by time. And engraved across its lid were two initials neither of them expected to see. CM. For a long moment neither of them moved. The valley stretched quietly beyond the ridge, bathed in the final golden light of afternoon. Wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere in the distance a hawk circled high above the cliffs. Yet all Luke could see was the small metal box resting beneath the stone marker. His eyes remained fixed on the engraved initials. CM Clara Mercer. Slowly he knelt. Beside it. The metal felt cool beneath his fingertips. Time had weathered its surface, but the engraving remained clear. Deliberate. Permanent. As though Clara had known exactly where this moment would lead. Aiyana stood nearby, silent and respectful. She understood that some discoveries belong to the heart before they belong to words. Luke carefully opened the box. Inside rested a folded letter, protected beneath a layer of oiled cloth. Nothing more. No treasure. No hidden fortune. Just a single letter waiting patiently through decades of seasons. He unfolded it slowly. The familiar handwriting greeted him one final time. If you have reached this place, Clara wrote, then you have already found what I hoped you would. Luke frowned gently. He continued reading. This valley is not important because it is hidden. It is important because it reminds us that some things survive only when people choose to care for them. Stories. Friendships. Hope. Kindness. None of them last by accident. Luke felt the wind brush across his face. The words settled into him with a quiet weight. He looked across the valley. It was beautiful in a simple way. Wildflowers swayed across the open ground. A narrow stream reflected the sky. Ancient cottonwoods stood near the water, their branches reaching upward like old guardians. Nothing about it seemed extraordinary. Yet somehow it felt sacred. Clara's letter continued. When Nita showed me this place, she told me something I never forgot. She said every person eventually reaches a horizon. Most believe it is an ending. But often it is simply the place where they must decide whether to stop or continue. Luke lowered the letter. 7 years earlier, he had stopped. Not physically. He still worked. Still breathed. Still moved through each day. But part of him had stopped reaching for anything beyond grief. Part of him had accepted loneliness as his future. Clara had known him well enough to see that possibility long before it happened. And somehow she had left behind a path leading him back toward life. His eyes returned to the final lines. If Aiyana is with you, then she carried this promise farther than anyone had a right to ask. Listen to her. Trust her. She carries more strength than she realizes. Aiyana looked away when Luke glanced toward her, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. A small smile touched his face. It felt unfamiliar. Yet natural. The letter ended with a single sentence. Do not spend your life looking behind you, Luke. There is still beauty ahead. Silence settled over the valley. Not an empty silence. A peaceful one. The kind that asks for nothing. Luke folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the box. Then he stood and looked toward the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and amber. For the first time in 7 years, he did not feel trapped by the past. Beside him stood someone who had arrived carrying a promise. Yet somehow she had delivered something greater. A second chance. As they turned their horses toward home, Luke realized Clara had been right. The horizon had never been the end of the road. It had only been the place where the next chapter began. 2 years later. Luke's old ranch house was no longer filled with silence. Laughter had returned to the place where only the wind once drifted through the weathered fences. That evening, Luke stood on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight spread across the fields before him. Aiyana was tending the flower garden Clara had always dreamed of planting. Beside her, a young boy was doing his best to help water the flowers, though most of the water ended up soaking his own boots. The laughter of mother and son echoed across the yard. Luke smiled softly. His eyes drifted toward the distant horizon, where the sun was slowly disappearing behind the red hills. Once, he had believed his life ended the day Clara died. Now he understood how wrong he had been. Because love does not end when someone leaves this world. It continues to live on in the hearts of those who remain. And in